This outrage, this abomination at their home. Of course, I knew who Nina Wolf's killer had to be, though I almost wanted to be wrong. I figured there was a slim possibility it could have been DCAK rather than Kyle Craig who had killed the judge, but that was a stretch of the imagination. I arrived out in the city of Fairfax at 2 in the morning. I found dozens of cars and vans and trucks, most with garish lights revolving on the tops of their roofs. The suburban neighborhood was up, too. Every house I passed, just about every window was glowing brilliantly, like fearful, vigilant eyes. So sad. A neighborhood like this. Peaceful and pretty. People just trying to live their lives with some kind of harmony and dignity. Was that too much to ask? Apparently it was. I climbed out of the R350 at the end of a cul-de-sac, and I started to walk. Then I began to jog, probably because I needed to run. Maybe I even wanted to run away, in some saner part of my brain, but I was moving toward the Wolf house just like I always did, drawn to danger, to chaos, to death and disaster. Suddenly I stopped. A chill knifed through me. I hadn't even gotten to the house, but I had the first awful image. It was right before my eyes. He'd known I'd come here and see it myself, hadn't he? A bright red X was painted on top of the Wolf's car, a black S-Class Mercedes. A second red X was painted across the front door, almost top to bottom. Except I knew they weren't X's. They were crosses, and they were meant just for me. The press was shouting questions from behind the police lines and also taking countless photographs of the house and car. It was all a blur for me right then. "It's DCAK, isn't it?" I heard. "What's he doing out here in Virginia? Is he going wide?" No, I thought, but I kept it to myself. Kyle Craig isn't going wide. Actually, he's homing in now, and he has his target all picked out. No, his targets. Kyle always did think big. Chapter 106. Kyle had spared George Wolf and the 3 children, and I wondered why. Maybe because he was so focused now. He'd wanted Judge Nina Wolf, and only her. So what would he do next? And how long would I have to wait before he appeared on my doorstep? Or maybe inside the house? My 8 o'clock session that morning was with Sandy Quinlan, but she didn't show up, which only helped to make me more uncomfortable about everything that was going on. Now my practice was blowing up too, going to hell before my eyes. I was also concerned. Sandy had never missed before, so I waited in the office until past 9. Then Anthony DeMeo didn't come to his session either. What was going on with those two? Were they together now? What else could go wrong today? I waited as long as I could, then called Bree to tell her I was on my way to pick her up. We were heading off later that afternoon to Montana via Denver to check out Tyler Bell's cabin. It was something we felt we had to do. See his place firsthand. Go through whatever he'd left there. As I was leaving my building, I nearly bumped into Sandy Quinlan. She was standing outside the front door on the sidewalk. Sandy was dressed all in black, covered with sweat, and out of breath. "Sandy, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my composure. "Where were you today?"
"Oh, Dr. Cross, I was afraid I'd miss you. I'm sorry I didn't call."
She squinted up at me and motioned me over to the curb.
"I had to come tell you. I'm leaving."
"Leaving?"
"Going back to Michigan. I don't belong here in Washington, and frankly, I came for the wrong reason. I mean, even if I did meet someone, what's the point if I hate the city, right?"
"Sandy, can we schedule one more appointment before you go? First thing on Monday? I'm traveling, or I'd see you over the weekend." She smiled, looking as confident as I'd ever seen her. Then she shook her head.
"I just came to say goodbye, Dr. Cross." My mind's all made up. I know what I have to do.
Well, all right then, I told Sandy. I put out my hand, but she opened her arms and hugged me instead. Strange, forced, almost theatrical, it seemed to me.
I'll tell you a secret.
She whispered against my shoulder.
I wish I'd met you somewhere else. Not as my therapist.
Then Sandy went up on her tiptoes and gave me a kiss on the lips. Her eyes flew wide. I think mine did too, and she blushed.
I can't believe I just did that.
She gushed like a teenage girl. Well, I guess there's a first time for everything, I said. I could have been angry, but what was the point? She was going back to Michigan, and maybe that was for the best. After a short, awkward silence, Sandy pointed with her thumb over her shoulder.
Walk me to my car?
I'm parked the other way, I told her. Her head tilted coyly.
Walk you to your car, then?
I laughed and took it as a compliment. Goodbye, Sandy. And good luck in Michigan. She finger-waved, then gave me a little wink.
Good luck to you, Dr. Cross.
Chapter 107.
At that moment, DCAK was playing another part, that of Detective James Corning, who put down his surveillance camera and stared out his car window like, well, any dumbass cop would. He had just snapped a pic of Alex Cross kissing his patient Sandy Quinlan, which, of course, wasn't a real name. Sandy Quinlan was just another role to play, like Anthony DeMeo and Detective James Corning. Corning had made it his business to keep tabs on Cross and Bree Stone all week. Getting too close wasn't wise, but their basic comings and goings were easy enough to track. Now he followed Cross to a parking lot near his office, and then to Bree Stone's apartment building on 18th. The two of them left together about 10 minutes later. Stone was carrying an overnight bag, traveling light, something few women seemed capable of doing. James Corning stayed on them until it was obvious to him that they were headed for Reagan National. Well, he wasn't all that surprised, actually. At the entrance to the airport parking garage, he got in behind them again. Cross found a space on level 3, and Corning kept going up. He parked on 4, and caught up with Cross and Stone again on the skyway to the terminal. James Corning stayed back in the pack to avoid any chance of being spotted. They checked in at American Airlines, so the departure board narrowed things for him. Denver was the logical choice. He waited for them to go down the escalator to security, then circled back to the ticketing area. He held up his badge for the next customer in line. "Excuse me, just take a second here. Police business." Then he showed his creds to the American Airlines agent at the counter. "I'm Detective Corning, MPD. I need a little information on 2 passengers you just checked in, Stone and Cross." After he got the information he needed, James Corning stopped and bought a donut, which he had no intention of eating. It was all part of his plan, though. An important prop. Fun one, too. He headed back to the parking garage. On 3, he stopped at Cross's car. He put a brand-new cell phone in with the donut, folded the bag over, and duct-taped it to the bottom of the driver's door seam. It was just out of sight for anyone passing by, but surely wouldn't be missed when Cross and Stone came home. On Sunday, 4:30, Flight 322 from Denver. DCAK might just be back to meet the flight himself.
Chapter 108. Bree and I flew to Denver on Friday afternoon, then up to Kalispell, Montana the next morning. Our return flight was early on Sunday, so we had only a day or so to get everything done and find out as much as possible about Tyler Bell, about whatever had been going on up here in the North Woods, and about what he might be planning next. The drive from Kalispell to Babb took us straight through Glacier National Park. I'd always wanted to see Glacier, and it didn't disappoint. The switchbacks on the Going to the Sun road had us alternately hugging a mountain wall, then looking straight down one. It was kind of humbling, actually, as well as beautiful, and would have been romantic if Bree and I had any time for that on this trip. At one point, she did look over at me and say, "Where there's a will." We got to Babb just after noon on Saturday. Deputy Steve Mills kindly agreed to drive up from the sheriff's office in Cutbank, saving us about 75 miles on twisting country roads, more than an hour's trip. Mills was loose and amiable and answered our very first question without being asked. "Met my wife while I was on holiday here from Manchester. Fishing trip of all things. 12 years ago and never looked back," he said in his proper English. "Once this place grabs hold of you, it doesn't let go. You'll see, I'm quite sure. I used to call myself Stephen, not Steve." We followed Mills south on 89, past the Blackfeet Reservation, to the tip of Lower St. Mary Lake. From there he took an unmarked dirt road for another mile and a half, until we came to a mostly overgrown track on the right. The side road was partitioned with 2 police sawhorses, one of them thrown over on its side. I wondered how effective these had been against the likes of CNN, and God only knew who else had wanted to visit. High wheatgrass brushed against the sides of the car as we drove back several hundred yards, then onto a cleared acre or more of land. Tyler Bell's cabin certainly wasn't deluxe, but it was no Unabomber shack either. He had sided it with natural red cedar that blended nicely into the landscape. It was small and nestled in the crook of a west-flowing river, with a gorgeous view of the mountains in the distance. I could certainly see why someone would choose this place to settle, so long as they had no need for human contact, and maybe murdered people for a living. Chapter 109. The front door to the cabin had no lock. Deputy Mills waited for us outside, and once we entered, we smelled why. Some combination of food and garbage had been rotting in here, possibly for months. It was beyond putrid. "So much for this being a little slice of heaven on earth," Bree said, putting a handkerchief over her nose as if this were a homicide scene. Maybe it was. The main room was a kitchen/dining/living area. A picture window at the back looked onto the river. All along the sidewall, Bell had a workbench littered with tools and several dozen fishing flies in various stages of completion. A small collection of rods hung on the wall. Other than 2 leather easy chairs, the furniture seemed to have been made by Tyler Bell himself, including a pair of pine bookcases. "You can tell a lot about a man by his books," Mills said, finally deciding to join us. He stood in front of them, scanning the lot. Biography, cosmology, all non-fiction. That say anything to you? "Whose biographies?" "That would be my first question," I said, and came over to look for myself. There were several volumes on American presidents: Truman, Lincoln, Clinton, Reagan, and Bush's 41 and 43. Other world leaders, too: Emperor Hirohito, Margaret Thatcher, Bin Laden, Ho Chi Minh, Churchill. "Delusions of grandeur, maybe?" I said. "Fits the bill for DCAK. At least what we think we know about him." "You don't sound too confident about your intel," huffed Mills, who was a huffy sort. "I'm not. He's been messing with us from the start. He's a game player." Bell's bedroom was smaller and darker. Dank, actually. He had a toilet and sink right in the room, partitioned off with another bookcase. I didn't see a tub or shower, unless you counted the river. In fact, it reminded me of a prison cell. And that made me think of Kyle Craig again. What the hell did Kyle have to do with all this? The only decorations were 3 framed photos on the wall, in a vertical stack that reminded me of the new website. The top one was an old black and white wedding portrait.